What is up, and welcome back everyone to a little bit of a different episode today. Today we'll be working on the Forester. Today is not an adventure video because if you guys have noticed in the last couple of adventure videos, I've had a little bit more road noise. It's not road noise, it's bearings. And that's what we'll be doing today because honestly, it's something I should have done a little while ago, especially with how much we really put the Forester to the test. These wheel bearings are having not a great time, and we're right around that 100,000 kilometer mark where we replace the timing belt. We should be probably replacing those wheel bearings, and well, the wheel bearings just thought they would let me know that they needed replacing on that last adventure and started making a little bit of noise. So that's what we're going to be doing today. I'm going to show you the easy way to replace bearings in particularly a 2004 Subaru Forester. This applies to some. This has the press-in bearings, which are a lot of fun. I'll show you the easiest way to do that, and then we'll show you the easiest way to do the back end too. So let's go ahead and jump right into it. And while the first part is probably the easiest, well, we just got to get access to the wheel bearings. So let's go ahead and take the wheels off. And with your wheels off, you're going to go and grab your favorite penetrating oil, PV Blaster. It seems to work pretty well for me, so that's what I'm using, and hit every single nut you're going to have to take off. So it's pretty much anything to do with the suspension, the axle nut, as well as in the front you're going to have your steering rack, as well as some other things here and there like your lower ball joint. And then in the back you're going to have that big long one, which I'll show you. Maybe we won't actually be having to take that out. We'll have to do something a little bit different, as well as the axle nut again. And then on the front and rear, don't forget your ABS sensors because those are also going to have to come out. So hit that with the whatever you're using, PV Blaster or whatever, and make sure it's sitting on there for a little bit as you kind of go on your next step. So with that being said, the front one is the one we're going to be tackling first. So the first thing we're going to want to do is break that axle nut free. For this, you're going to need a 32mm axle nut socket because that's the size. You're probably not going to find it in your socket set. You'll have to get a different one. But first, what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to take a chisel here and actually push out this little piece of pounded in axle nut so that it will allow it to spin, and then we can go ahead and take this off, and I'll show you my little technique here. And with the notch out of the axle nut so that it will spin, I've noticed that someone put a lot of anti-seize on this, so this might actually be relatively easy. So anyways, we're going to be using our breaker bar for this, obviously, and then what we're going to be doing is we're going to be jamming a piece of wood under one of these studs so that when we pull down or whatever we have to do, I can't remember, I need to look at this, we're going to be pushing against this block of wood, and this will help us to essentially break it free. You can also have someone use the brakes, but honestly, I think a block of wood's stronger than the brakes. The one thing you do need to note is you should probably keep your wheel on the other side, because if you have an open diff like me, it's just going to kind of lift the car up. But as you seen, it did eventually break it free. So we can go ahead and take off the axle nut now. And there we go, we have the axle nut off. Next thing we're going to tackle is, I think we're going to go ahead and tackle the brakes. You're not going to take off the caliper off the mounting bracket, you're just going to take it off here. And that way then you can get this whole piece off, and then you can go ahead and take the rotor off and then access the rest of the bolts. One thing is you want to make sure you mark your alignment, but I'll remind you once we're doing that. And then, as I said, we won't be tackling this one and this one. What we'll be doing is the bolts down here and a little bit up here. It's essentially what attaches it to the knuckle, so we're going to go ahead and take those off now. And thankfully, because I did my brakes just recently, these are not hard to take off. And then once you have those two bolts out, what you're going to do is you're going to just shimmy this off and then take some of your favorite zip ties and zip tie it kind of out of the way. I like to just zip tie it right onto my springs on my coilovers. And then the next thing we're going to be tackling is this guy right here. So your steering rack or your tie rod end. So these have cotter pins, which will make them nice and fun. I'm going to try to hammer it. There we go. They're really thin cotter pins, so they should be easy to bend. And well, with it broken through, we're just going to... And then once that cotter pin's off, it's actually relatively easy, or at least I've had good luck with just my impact, so I'm going to go ahead and impact it off. Like that, see? So honestly, as I said, I've had good luck with these, but then what we're going to do is we're going to hammer this out so that we can get the next piece, which will be probably our ABS sensor. And for the ABS sensor, because it's torqued even lower, you should be able to just, once again, impact it off. And then it might take a little bit of wiggling to get it off, but what you do is you'll essentially pull the whole sensor off of the knuckle. And now we're gonna go ahead and loosen these two off because we wanna break them free, but we don't want to take them completely off until we take the lower control arm off, or lower ball joint off. So what we're gonna do is take a little bit of a silver Sharpie and we're gonna mark our alignment so that when we put it back together, we will have the same alignment. So what I like to do is I like to do 2 alignment markings. I have just the 1 camber bolt, but just in case you have 2 camber bolts, maybe you want to mark both of them like I am. And then that way you won't lose your alignment. So we're going to break these free now. They're just 19s. You're going to need a breaker bar because they're like 100 and some odd foot-pounds. And then for the lower ball joint here, we have another cotter pin. So again, bend it around and pull the old cotter pin out if you can. If not, just drill it out. And with that nut removed, then we're going to remove both of these nuts and bolts so that we can go ahead and kind of maneuver this knuckle as we like to get that kind of bushing pressed out of the lower knuckle. And you'll notice now that everything kind of just wants to fall apart. So what we're going to do is we're going to pull this, kind of move our shock out of the way as best as we can, and make sure that our CV doesn't fall completely out of the knuckle and the CV axle. And then we have just one more thing to do. And as you can see here, it will be a little bit of a pain to get this CV axle out of the knuckle, but just kind of maneuvering it like that will get you out. And you can hear why I need new bearings. And you can also see that's I'm assuming bearing grease on my CV. And then eventually we want to get the axle out of the way, so I'm gonna go ahead. I might have put this the wrong way, but we'll see. I can maneuver everything. There we go. I'm gonna move the shock to this side, pull my axle kind of up and past, and then I'm gonna tie or zip tie my axle to my shock. That way everything's out of the way, nothing's falling while I'm trying to get this knuckle removed. And then finally it's time to remove this lower kind of pressed in ball joint on the knuckle. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take 2 pieces of wood, then we're gonna put a piece of metal, pipe wrench is great here, and we're going to essentially just hammer it apart. And ta-da, your knuckle is removed. And there you go, you have the front knuckle out, and well, you can hear exactly why it actually needs replacement. That, and also, it's got a little bit of play. It's going to be hard for you guys to see, but I can just hear it clunk around just a little bit. So that's what happens when you are going ahead and doing the test where you press on the side of the wheels. And if you have a little bit of play, this is exactly what's doing it. It's this bearing right here that's kind of rotating or shifting on itself. As I said, it's going to be very hard for you guys to hear. But that's essentially what is happening. So now I'm going to show you the easiest way to replace this bearing. So now that you got your knuckle out, because this is an 04, it's pressed in. So the easiest way to go get this replaced is not doing it. Because unless you have a press and a little bit of time, it's going to take you probably more than it's worth to just take this to the shop, your favorite Subaru shop, and have them go press in a new bearing. They'll probably honestly have them in stock because this is pretty common for the 04s. My STI has the exact same thing, where it's a press in, there's no bolts here, you actually just have to put this in a press out the hub, press out the bearing, and put a new one in. So that's exactly what we're going to do. So we're going to take this to the shop and get a new one just like that. There we go. So now we have our fresh bearing in the knuckle, so we can go ahead and now install this back on the front of the Forester. And well, first what we're going to do is we're going to take our ball joint at the bottom and drop it in. And well, the next thing is we're going to be putting the axle back in the hub. So to do that, we're going to actually go ahead and first grease the axle because this is what you're supposed to do according to the Subaru manual, so that's what I'm going to go do. And what you're going to want to do is get the grease specifically on the splines here. that will make it so that you're able to slide it into the hub. You can use essentially what is high temperature like race grease. I'm going for some more waterproof stuff because this car spends more time in water than racing, so that we're going to go ahead and grease that. Also just going to grease the threads so that we have a little bit of anti-seize coating on there so that it won't seize up on us. Then we're going to go ahead and cut our zip ties that are holding up our axle, making sure to support the axle so that it doesn't drop. And then we just got to go ahead and feed the axle back into the knuckle. So I'd like to turn it and then kind of push the knuckle all the way down, and eventually you'll get it back where it needs to be, kind of like that. And after a little bit of fight, you'll eventually get those spines lined up and through there. But don't put your axle nut on yet. We're going to go ahead and put our suspension back on to prevent the knuckle essentially from falling out and pulling the axle out with it. And then don't forget to line up your markings on your bolt. And again, we're going to go ahead and just put these on loosely while we tighten up everything else, and then we can go ahead and torque it. And at this time we can go ahead and slap that axle nut on there. Again, no torque, just getting everything lined up. And with everything bolted down, as you can see, now we're going to go ahead and just zip it up with the impact, and then we're going to go ahead and torque everything down. And then with everything bolted up, what we're going to do is go ahead and torque down all the bolts. Starting with this one at 30 foot-pounds. And then once it's torqued down, you're going to want to take your cotter pin and put it through, and then bend the ends of the cotter pin around the nut. And well, here they want 19.99, so 20 foot-pounds. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then with it torqued, we'll go ahead and feed our cotter pin through and bend it just like we did down below. And while we're in here, it's kind of hard for you guys to see now, but we'll get this ABS sensor at 24 foot-pounds. And then finally, we'll wrap up with these two here. These are at 129 foot-pounds, so they're a little bit heftier. And then last but not least, we'll go ahead, toss on the brake rotor, and put on the caliper. And then we're going to torque them to 59 foot-pounds on the back of the knuckle. And then last but not least, we're going to be torquing this axle nut to 162 foot-pounds. So this is the big one. And for the final touch, we're going to want to go ahead and notch our axle nut. So just get a chisel, put it kind of in the notch, and give it a good whack. And well, there we go. We have our front wheel bearing replaced and everything is buttoned up. So with that being said, what we can do now is we can go ahead and move along to the back. And well, here in the back, we're going to go ahead and tackle the axle nut as we did first in the front. So again, grab your chisel, hammer, and hammer that axle nut notch back up. Then we're going to go about removing this the easy way. We're going to take one of our wheels that actually has a missing center cap on it, and we're going to go ahead and toss it on here. And if you guys have done Subaru stuff before, you know exactly what I'm doing. Then we're going to go ahead, let it down, and well, we're going to undo this axle nut. And with the tire on the ground, we're going to go ahead, take where our center cap used to be, toss our breaker bar and our axle nut on there. And then we're going to be removing the brake caliper, so we'll be removing it from the knuckle itself using the two bolts in the back. Then we'll go ahead and zip tie it to the spring like we did up front. And then from here we can go ahead, take off the rotor, and check out the mess of handbrake we get to deal with in a little bit. But before we get into the handbrake, we're going to go ahead and remove this bolt. It goes from here to the actual front. It is supposedly a pain. I'm hoping it's not a pain on this car because we've soaked it in internal oil for a while. So we're going to go ahead, break this one free, and then we have the trailing arm one down below it. We're going to break that one free. And again, if this one sticks, we can go ahead and cut it off. If it breaks free, then we're good to go. So let's go ahead and first break this one free. Oh, it's breaking free. And there we go. We got the nut off of the long bolt. So the long bolt we'll have to press out with a chisel. But what we're going to do is we're going to tackle this guy down here now. And with both those two lower bolts loosened off, now we're going to go ahead and tackle these two. These two, as you guys know, 19 mil. I actually have a different size here because I'm using camber bolts. That's why I specifically marked up. But essentially all we got to do is get our breaker bar, put a 19 on there, and break them loose. But do not take them off quite yet because we want to make sure everything breaks loose before we go ahead and start removing everything. And well, now we get to have fun with the parking brake setup. Or I think the drum brakes are similar. They do have a self-centering thing. We don't here, I believe. But what we're going to do is there's these little like springs with a cap on them and then a little fin poking out. If you poke at them, you notice that they spring back and forth. This is what's holding the shoes in place. This also means it's going to be lots of fun putting this all back together, but we'll do that later. So what this means is you can go ahead, take some pliers and kind of twist that center piece. You'll see that there's a notch this way and it's facing this way, so we want to spin it around. So it takes a little bit of just fidgeting around with it. Sometimes I grab the center thing, I twist it, but eventually what will happen is it'll pop off like that, and then you'll have a spring and a little cap. I don't recommend reusing those. I'm not. You'll see in a little bit what we're doing with these rear ends, or rear knuckles, but essentially, then you got a little pin in the back, and as you can see, it's got the little teeth here. So we got one off. You can see that it's kind of moving around a lot more now. We'll do the other side, and there we go. We have the spring again and the little cap. So that means that these shoes kind of can move around now. We're not completely done yet because now we have the self-adjuster. It's kind of hard for you guys to see on the bottom, but you're going to want to spin that. And then once you got that self-adjuster, there's a little spring down here below. You're going to go ahead and just pry it off. It won't be under that much tension because, well, it's for holding the the adjustment in place. And there we go. That's the spring down by the adjuster. Then you can pry these apart. The adjuster will come out with its lack of grease, and then you're left with this. I just kind of play around with it till pieces start falling out. So you can see we got a spring here and the plate, and then we're left with the shoes and these two springs. Now I found if I kind of twist this one, eventually it will come out and then you can get your shoe off. And then this one is the pain. So you want to go ahead. This plate's going to wiggle around, but what this is attached to the park brake cable. So I found if I can kind of just maneuver it so that I get a little more slack, and then I go ahead and pull the spring off like that, it all falls apart. And then once it all falls apart, all you got left is this lever and this guy right here. So what you're going to want to do is the spring kind of keeps it attached here. So you're going to just kind of pry up on the spring and then push this up a little bit and slide it over, and then there you go. We will need this part, but we won't be needing these old brake shoes. And with that off, now we can see our ABS sensor here. So the ABS sensor is going to be a bit of a pain to remove, but first what we're going to want to do is undo the bolt in the back here. So you can actually see where it threads through here. We're just going to undo it here. And with the bolt out, now we got to somehow take out the ABS sensor. And let me tell you, they probably aren't going to be fun. So what I like to do is I like to grab a chisel here, and I just start to tap on the side. Watch out for the metal post that actually detects it, but you can tap on the side here. And I just slowly punch it out. And just like that, your ABS sensor is removed. This one's really crusty. I'm going to have to give that a good clean before we reinstall it. But now, all that we're left with is, well, we got to remove the bolts and this park brake. Now that we've removed the park brake, removed the ABS sensor, all we got to remove is the bolts that we have broke free and then the park brake cable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead, remove all the bolts holding the knuckle on, and then I'm going to place the knuckle on a piece of cardboard or wood here, and then we can remove that park brake cable, and then we are all done removal. And with everything off of the knuckle and the axle zip tied up, we are now able to go ahead and move the knuckle down, place it on a block of wood, and tackle this guy. So this is what you think would be actually pretty difficult, but as long as it's not completely rusted together, we should be able to remove it pretty easily. So what's going on here is this is all part of the car, and then this is all part of the handbrake, and there's a little clip that holds it together. So we're gonna once again grab our hammer and chisel, as we do with this kind of stuff, and see if we can get that little clip out. This is the clip you're removing. It's just a little U-clip, and don't lose that because you'll need it. And then essentially this part right here will separate from the knuckle. But you're gonna have a little bit of fun with that because it's not gonna go without a fight. So I like to just start hammering with a chisel and eventually getting it to move. And then once we have it essentially separated, you should just be able to wiggle it out. And there you go, your parking brake cable should just kind of come out of the knuckle, and we officially have the knuckle off. And there we go, we have our rear knuckle out of our Subaru. So now you're probably wondering, well, why did I do this when I had the other one out so I can go take them all to the shop at the same time? Well, as I said, this video is the absolute easiest way to do your wheel bearings in the 04 chassis. So you know what you can do instead of replacing bearings on that old knuckle? Just buy a preloaded knuckle. I know this one I had here, I'm pretty sure is OEM, so it's been on for 400,000. I think it's time to give it a little refresh. No rust, new wheel studs, new hub, new tone ring for the ABS, and overall just a nicer, cleaner package. So that's what we're going to be installing. As I said, the easiest absolute possible way to do your bearings in your Subaru is to get a pre-built assembly. Can't do it for the front, that's why we had to take it to the shop. But for the rears, we can just go ahead, pick one of these up at Rock Auto, and we're good to go. So let's go ahead and start tossing this in the car. And well, first things first is we're going to be greasing up our axles so that the splines slide in appropriately and that we don't have any issues when we go to pull the axle out at a later date. So we'll just go ahead, grease it up, make sure everything has a nice amount of grease on it. And then what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead, take our new knuckle here, and we're going to slot it in to the suspension first. That way our suspension has something to kind of rest on as we put together the rest of the components. And then with these two bolts supporting the knuckle here, what we can do is we can go ahead and put our axle in. So I'm going to go ahead, cut the zip ties so that our axle drops out. And then I'm going to go ahead and just pull this whole thing out. Go ahead and feed it through in the hub. And well, the next piece is going to be our giant bolt. Thankfully with this kit, it came with a new bolt, so that's exactly what we're going to do, is we're going to send it through. Obviously what we're going to do is the same way that it came from, so through this, and then we'll just kind of push it through each of these. And what I found is, as you're pushing it through, use your impact and it'll make it go a lot quicker. Then we'll take our washer nut, put it on the other side, and we're not going to torque anything down yet, as you guys saw on the front. On the top, we're just going to go ahead and get the bolt kind of on there so that we know it's on there and everything's in place when we can give it a good shake. And then finally, we have our trailing arm here. I'm going to feed my parking brake through now, so it just makes it a lot easier, but don't worry if you didn't. It's movable, it moves pretty well, and you can actually feed it through after. And then we're going to go ahead, line it up, and put our bolt in. And while we're here, we'll go ahead and put the ABS sensor in. I'm going to give it a good little clean, some brake clean, before we put it back in, might as well. And then you're just going to feed it through where it came out of a couple hours ago. It is magnet, so it'll be a little bit of a pain, but once you get it in there, take your 13 mil and go ahead and just thread it in. And then finally, since we have everything kind of bolted up and on there, what we'll do is we're going to go ahead and torque everything down. And starting at the bottom, we're going to be torquing the trailing arm bolt to 66 foot-pounds. And then we'll be torquing this guy to 103. And then the ABS sensor goes to 24.6. And these guys go to 148. Make sure that you have your lined up camber bolts if you have camber on the rear of your car. And well, there you go. You've done the hard part. No, just kidding. It's the easy part. So now we get to do the handbrake. And well, I have a hardware kit because if your brakes are as rusty as I am, you're going to need it because you're not going to be salvaging the old brake kit. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using this. Although we do need a couple parts from the old handbrake. First off is that little clip. We will put that in at the end. But then we also have this little V. It goes like this. Make sure that the bumps are facing inwards. And then this little plate here. And then finally, you won't be using the shoe, but you'll be using this little piece. What you got to do is you got to hammer this little guy out right here. What I do is I take my chisel, wherever that would be, and I just hammer this little clip off. And then we take this piece and then put it on our new shoes. So let's do that first. And then with enough hammering, you'll eventually get this piece off. So what you're going to do is you're going to grab your new brake pad. Go ahead, put this on. And then there's a little like C-clip in your bag of goodies. Like this guy. Then we're just going to go ahead, slide this on top. And then I like to use some vice grips and I just clamp it shut. You are supposed to grease in here, but I usually grease it when I'm greasing everything else. So now we got this ready, and we got our two other parts from our old brake. Let's go ahead and actually put our park brake together. Now hopefully you're patient because this is going to test your patience for sure. So what we'd like to do first here is we'd like to go ahead, take our shoe, grab this because this connects us to the park brake, and go ahead and attach this. All you got to do is move this spring and attach it. And then once you have this on, you get to have a little bit of a moment to collect your patience as you go ahead and grease everything. So any point where metal touches metal, you want to grease. So there's points along here, there's this, as well as in here, and then inside this guy. We'll also be greasing each side of this. So let's go ahead and do that. And now that you have everything greased up, it's really time to go ahead and test your patience. So what you'll be doing is essentially taking this guy, putting it up here where it meets this, and then going ahead, taking one of your massive springs here, hooking it in using this side, so kind of like, and then attaching it here. But don't forget to go ahead and add this plate like this, making sure that this little notch is pointing inwards. And then, well, it's all kind of sitting here, get a good screwdriver, or bad screwdriver, and put it all together. And there we go, we have our main spring on. But the fun is just getting started because now we're going to be taking one of these little things, a spring, and this guy. And what we're going to be doing is feeding this through the back, and then putting the spring in the middle, kind of pressing down on the plate, and then feeding this through here and turning it so it locks and holds a pad down. I like to use a 6mm socket on the screwdriver and kind of use that to press into that notch area right there, and then kind of twist it either with my hand in the back or twist it up front. Just a warning, this will take some time and it will be an absolute pain. And way too long later, we have this one on. So that means that we can go ahead and start on the second brake shoe. And then here on the other side, what we're going to be using is we're going to be using this. Make sure that this point is going this way, and this side, I over-greased a little bit, has the spring on it. This will be kind of feeding in through here. There's a little notch on that side, and it'll be feeding into this notch on this shoe. So essentially this goes here. So we'll be putting another yellow spring on at this side, but first things first, we want to worry about getting this guy and our friends here, these on. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. And with a little bit more struggling, we got that second one in there. As you can see, I used this spring that we're actually be using at a later part to kind of hold it together as we kind of made our way around here. I do notice that this guy likes to move around, and go in the wrong spot. So check that it's in the right spot and grab your next strong spring. do the same thing, put it through here, and then make sure that this guy is pushed over. You're gonna have to make sure that's in the right spot, and then push this guy over so that you have room there. And then once you have both of those hooked up, then you can go ahead and get this guy. So you're gonna want to obviously grease it up. We're gonna grease up the threads here. And then you're gonna take this spring here and spring it across. And with our handbrake all done, we can go ahead and slide the rotor over. And there we go, we have our handbrake assembly all done, which means we get to put on the normal brakes and wrap it up. And then finally, we're gonna torque this back to the car at 38.3. But we have one final nut to torque, the axle nut. And with the wheel torqued to 140 foot-pounds, we have officially changed all the wheel bearings. Well, I only recorded one side, but we changed both sides of my Subaru Forester. So that was the quickest and easiest way to change them on this 04. And while we could have went ahead and pressed them in ourselves, I wanted to get out there and I wanted to do more adventuring because, well, it is summer. So the next couple videos are going to be more adventures, so look out for those. But anyways, that is going to be it for today. So as always, peace out and stay humble.